The words echoed in the forge despite the constant grinding of metal. The group held their breath, unsure if they had been found out. Then, the foundry continued its terrible rhythm beneath them. Metal striking metal, vats bubbling with a sickly green luminescence, and the slow mechanical groan of chains and pistons turning somewhere deeper within the iron lattice. The sound should have been overwhelming, but after the demon's voice, it felt almost distant. They remained crouched along the narrow ledge overlooking the forge floor, the stone slick with condensation and grime. Azmakel stood below, examining the blackened work table while the machines of his domain carried on around him like obedient limbs. Finally, Juno leaned slightly closer to the others, voice barely louder than breath. "What do you want to do?" Dorian's eyes never left the forge. "We need to get closer." Jackson swallowed, his gaze drifting toward the massive demon below. "I don't remember him being this big, or scary looking." "I'm sure he's made a few modifications since you last saw him, Jackson," Gabriel murmured. Cassian rubbed a hand across his jaw, the dried blood there flaking slightly beneath his glove. His voice came out low and measured. "Vera and Adrian both warned us that we weren't ready for this." No one argued. Siberic grunted from behind the group. She wasn't wrong. Dorian leaned forward carefully, eyes tracking the movements below with analytical precision. The vats, the assembly table, the lines of twisted workers feeding materials into the system like parts of the machinery themselves. "This isn't just a workshop," he said quietly. "It's a mass production." Juno grimaced. "Production of what?" Below them, one of the vats flared brighter as a new body was lowered into the glowing liquid. Mechanical arms guided the form with perfect, emotionless efficiency. Dion shifted his weight slightly beside Juno, expression dark in a way that didn't suit his normally open face. "Dion think he's making soldiers." Cassian looked again at the iron scaffolding stretching across the cavern, and then at the demon overseeing it all like a master craftsman. "Not just soldiers," Cassian said after a moment. His voice was quieter now. "An army." Jackson let out a soft whistle that he quickly regretted and stifled halfway through. Leaf, who had been completely still since Azmakel appeared, finally spoke. "That emissary." Everyone glanced toward him. His eyes remained fixed on the platform where the emissary had stood minutes earlier. "He wasn't afraid of Azmakel," Leaf continued. "Not the way a normal man should be." "No," Dorian agreed. "He wasn't." Gabriel folded his arms, brow furrowing. "He also said something interesting." Juno tilted her head slightly. "Which part? The mention of Lord Adrian, or the part where they want us dead?" "The part where they serve the same lord." The group felt quiet again. Even the forge seemed to lean into that silence. Cassian's eyes narrowed. Xavier. Dorian nodded slowly. "It fits too neatly not to be." Jackson rubbed his face in frustration. "So let me get this straight," he muttered. "Lord Adrian's right-hand man is working with a demon who's building a mechanical army under the city for a dead god who, from the looks of things lately, just might not stay dead?" He glanced around the cavern again. "And we came down here to do what exactly?" "To stop it, of course," Juno said automatically. Jackson gave her a look. "Oh, right. Of course. My bad." A faint metallic shriek echoed across the forge floor as one of the massive machines shifted position. Azmakel moved again. The demon stepped away from the table, his massive frame silhouetted against the glowing vats as he surveyed his domain. The mask of envy caught the green light. Despite the giant grotesque form it sat upon, the mask was elegant, incredibly crafted, designed with malice and intent. Cassian stared down at the forge, jaw tight. He studied the scale of it all again. The systems, the workers, the machinery, Azmakel himself. Every instinct in his body screamed the same truth. This is not a fight you win by charging. Leaf spoke what they all were thinking. "If we attack him now," he said quietly, "we die." Juno nodded, agreed. Leaf glanced toward the deeper parts of the forge, where massive tunnels branched away into darkness beneath the scaffolding. "Which means the only smart thing to do," his voice trailed off. Cassian finished his thought, "is to learn everything we can before he realizes we're here." Below them, Azmakel's mechanical arm clicked softly as the blades retracted and extended again. The demon turned slightly, gazing across the cavern. For a brief moment, Cassian had the unsettling feeling that the demon wasn't looking at the forge at all, that he was looking up into the shadows, up at them. Cassian very slowly lowered his head. "Stay very still," he whispered. The moment stretched thin as they all held their breath. After what felt like an eternity, the artificer returned to his work table, his massive form bending slightly as tools whirred to life along one of his mechanical arms. Sparks flared briefly, swallowed almost immediately by the haze of green smoke drifting across the forge. Only then did Cassian gesture to the group. They began to move. The ledge they had hidden upon fed into a narrow run of iron scaffolding bolted directly into the cavern wall. The structure creaked faintly beneath their weight as they stepped onto it, but the thunder of the forge swallowed the sound. The metal was hot beneath their boots. Juno moved first, shield angled tight against her back to keep the edge from scraping. Dion followed close behind her, his bulk somehow controlled, careful in a way that would have surprised anyone who had only seen him in battle. Next was Jackson, then Leaf and Gabriel, followed by Dorian and Siberic. Cassian brought up the rear. Step by step, they slipped along the outer edge of Azmakel's domain. The smell grew worse the closer they crept. It wasn't just blood. This was something else entirely. The air was thick with burned hair, hot iron, chemical rot, and the unmistakable stench of cooked flesh layered beneath machine grease and all chemical fumes. Jackson pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm gonna be sick," he muttered quietly. "Quiet," Juno whispered. Below them, one of the vats hissed loudly as clamps lifted something newly forged from the glowing liquid. A torso hung suspended in iron grips, half encased in plated armor that had been fused directly into muscle and bone. Veins of the same sickly green fluid pulsed faintly beneath the metal seams as the thing twitched weakly. Mechanical arms descended immediately. One held a spinning drill. Another carried a bundle of iron tendons. The workers bolted into the surrounding scaffolding turned their blank faces toward the process as though awaiting instruction. Then Azmakel arrived. He moved through the forge like gravity itself had shifted around him. The ground trembled faintly under the weight of his piston-driven stride. 4 arms worked simultaneously as he approached the suspended body. The clawed hand steadied the torso. The multi-tool arm whirred. The smaller, more precise arm selected instruments from a rack of surgical implements from a shelf nearby. Juno felt her stomach tighten as they crept closer along the scaffold above him. They were close enough to hear and see the procedure, and it was visceral. The whirring saw along Azmakel's arm spun to life with a hungry metallic scream. Without hesitation, the demon cut. The torso jerked violently as the blade opened the chest cavity with brutal efficiency. There was no scream. The throat had been removed earlier, replaced with a brass vent that hissed steam with every twitch. Azmakel leaned in, studying the exposed ribs like a craftsman evaluating flawed wood. "Too soft," he growled. One of the smaller arms reached inside the open chest and removed something dark and ruined. The heart. He dropped it into a tray beside the table without looking. Another tool arm extended forward carrying a replacement. Not organic. A small iron engine no larger than a fist, its surface etched with twisting sigils that pulsed faintly with green light. Azmakel slid it into the cavity with gentle care. Better. He connected thin tubes running from the device into the creature's veins. The machine whined softly, then the torso convulsed. A mechanical heartbeat began to thrum beneath the ribs. Jackson nearly gagged. "I don't want to watch this anymore." Dorian leaned slightly forward, eyes burning with horrified fascination. "He's replacing organs." Gabriel shook his head slowly. "Not just replacing," he whispered. "Improving them." Azmakel continued working. 2 of his arms stitched metal ribs over the opening with molten wire while another adjusted the engine inside the chest with microscopic precision. The clawed hand held the body steady through the entire process. Across the forge floor, more tables held unfinished horrors. Bodies split open, limbs replaced with iron assemblies, heads connected to glass cylinders filled with swirling green fluid. Cassian forced himself to keep looking. They needed to understand what this place truly was. On the table, metal teeth locked into place. Then, the arm twitched. The rest of the body convulsed. Juno closed her eyes for a moment. "Abomination," she whispered. Below them, the newly assembled creature was lowered from the clamps. It staggered once, then straightened. The green light in its veins pulsed brighter. Without hesitation, it turned and walked toward the scaffolding where the other half-machine workers labored. No command given, no hesitation, just obedience. Cassian felt the implications settle heavily into his chest. Another table lit up below them as Azmakel moved to begin the next construction. A new body was wheeled into place. The demon's mechanical saw spun eagerly to life once more. Dorian had stopped listening to the whir of the machines. His gaze had fixed on Azmakal below, not in curiosity or calculation like before, but with a focus so intense it bordered on something else. Something brittle. Cassian leaned slightly toward him. Dorian? No response. Down below, Azmakal lifted another limb from a tray of miscellaneous parts and held it to the green glow of the vats, studying the fibers beneath his skin with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman inspecting good material. The sight made something inside Dorian finally fracture. His brother's face flashed through his mind without warning. Not as he had last seen him, not broken and hollow beneath the demon's work, but as he had been before, laughing, alive. Then the image shattered beneath the memory of what Azmakal had taken from him. Dorian straightened slowly. Juno reached for him immediately, fingers closing around his arm. Dorian, she whispered sharply. Don't. But he was already pulling away. I need to speak with him. The words were quiet, terribly calm. Cassian stepped in front of him before he could move farther down the scaffold. That's not a conversation, brother. That's suicide. Dorian met his eyes. I know. There was no anger in his voice, no bravado, only certainty. Jackson blinked. We just said no suicide missions. Juno tightened her grip on his sleeve. Dorian. He placed a hand over hers briefly, just long enough to reassure her. Then he stepped away from the shadows. Boots rang softly against the iron scaffold as he descended the narrow staircase that spiraled down toward the forge floor. The sound carried farther than he would have liked. Below, Azmakal paused. One of the demon's mechanical arms froze mid-motion, its saw blade slowing with a whining grind before falling silent. The vast head turned slowly. The mask of envy caught the green light as Azmakal looked upward. Dorian continued down the last steps until he reached the floor of the forge. Heat rolled over him immediately, thick and oppressive. The demon watched him approach, and before Dorian could reach the platform, Azmakal broke the silence. Well, the demon said, voice layered with that unsettling blend of metal and flesh. That is new. One of the tool arms folded back into place against his side with a soft click. You climb out of the shadows of my forge like a curious insect, Azmakal continued, tilting his head slightly. And do not show fear. New variables indeed. Dorian stopped several paces away from the massive work table, close enough that he could see the seams where metal plates had been riveted into Azmakal's skin. I came here to speak with you. Why should I be afraid? Azmakal's clawed hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. A laugh scraped out of him like stone dragged across steel. You came to speak with me? The demon leaned forward slightly, examining him. If that is the case, then you should know to be afraid. Dorian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted one gauntleted hand, the faint blue glow of arcane circuitry flickering across the metal plates. Azmakal noticed it instantly. The demon's eyes narrowed slightly behind the mask. Ah. One of his smaller arms extended toward Dorian's gauntlet, stopping just short of touching it. Craftsmanship. The word came out almost fondly. Dorian allowed the gauntlet to hum softly, letting the intricate runework speak for itself. I built it myself. Azmakal's head tilted. And the armor? Dorian nodded. Yes. The demon studied him for a long moment. Then something like curiosity crept into his voice. You are not merely prey, then. Dorian took a step forward. Then you will speak with me. Azmakal's mechanical arm rotated slowly, the blade retracting with a metallic sigh. You are brave, the demon said. Or very foolish. Possibly both? That earned a low chuckle. Azmakal straightened slightly, towering over him. Very well, he said at last. Speak, tiny artificer. His clawed hand gestured lazily toward the work table. You have my curiosity. Dorian's jaw tightened. Many years ago, you made a deal with a woman at an orphanage for the bodies and souls of children. My brother and I were at that orphanage. The giant demon shifted slightly, examining him. So, Azmakal said slowly, folding two of his arms behind his back while the others idly adjusted tools along the work table. You have come for revenge. Disappointing and foolish after all. The demon's voice was almost conversational. Dorian didn't look away. What did you do with his body? Asmakel made a thoughtful sound, low and metallic. I do remember many things, but then again, your kind breaks so easily it's hard to keep track. One of the smaller arms reached into a tray and lifted a freshly grown tendon, examining the fibers beneath the green glow of the vats. But I do remember the ones that fight. The tendon snapped softly between his fingers and he discarded it. Unfortunately, it appears he didn't, he almost whispered, because I don't remember either of you. The green eyes behind the mask of envy flared as the line landed, burning the air between them. Dorian fought to restrain himself. Tell me what you did with his body. What kind of creature have you made him into? The question hung between them. Asmakel's head tilted again, amused by Dorian's persistence. Look around you, you pathetic creature. Whatever is left of your brother's body has long been used up. A cog in my machine, as it were. One of the mechanical arms extended toward Dorian's gauntlet again, hovering just inches from the metal. Judging by your work, I expected you to be more intelligent. The clawed hand traced a slow circle in the air. Unfortunate. Boring. Where are your friends? I was told I would be receiving visitors to attend to. Asmakel leaned back against the work table, towering over him like a monument of steel and flesh. Across the cavern, Cassian and the others slipped quietly down another staircase of iron scaffolding. Jackson winced as one of the metal rungs creaked beneath his weight, but the thunder of the forge swallowed the sound. Dorian folded his arms slowly, letting the glow of the gauntlet pulse faintly. I came to hear from your own mouth, he said, before we ripped that mask from your face. Asmakel gave a theatrical sigh. Oh, how brave. The demon turned and reached toward a partially assembled body lying on the work table beside him. With one effortless motion, he lifted the torso upright, exposing the metal lattice that now served as its spine. You should understand this better than most, Asmakel said quietly. You build machines. You refine the work of others. He gestured lazily around the cavern. I do the same. Your brother was just collateral damage to the process. The vats pulsed behind him. Green light washed across the rows of half-finished creations. You think you understand the gravity of the world, but are caught up in a plot for revenge only because it is your brother that was lost. I am merely a vessel, a conduit, and a creator preparing the way. And when our Lord returns, Asmakel continued, voice rising slightly over the roar of the forge, he will reward the faithful. Dorian's eyes hardened. Xavier will never return. Asmakel's head tilted again. You speak his name boldly. He's not here, Dorian replied. Not yet, Asmakel agreed, but soon. It is unfortunate that you will not be here to see the truth. One of the smaller arms reached toward a nearby control lever and pulled it slowly. Across the cavern, another vat opened with a hiss. A newly finished creature rose from the glowing liquid. Its eyes burned green. Asmakel watched it emerge with quiet satisfaction. The world thinks death is the end of power, the demon said. How unimaginative. Behind him, the new construct staggered forward and joined the ranks of workers already laboring along the scaffolding. Dorian glanced toward it. Asmakel smiled beneath his mask. And when Xavier returns to claim his throne again, the faithful will not need to beg for survival. The clawed hand flexed slowly. They will take it. Dorian let the silence stretch. Behind Asmakel, Cassian finally slipped down the final ladder onto the forge floor. Juno and Saberic followed, shields angled carefully to avoid scraping the stone. Dion and Gabriel moved to the opposite side of the work table, using the towering vats for cover, while Leaf and Jackson slipped into the shadows along the wall. They were in position. Please keep talking, Dorian, Jackson whispered under his breath. At the artificer's table, Asmakel studied Dorian with open curiosity. You are facing certain death, and still, no fear, he said, the mask pulsing with green energy. Dorian shrugged slightly. I do not fear death. The demon laughed again, the sound echoing through the cavern like grinding gears. Good, Asmakel said. The mask of envy gleamed as he leaned closer. Because I am enjoying this. His clawed finger tapped Dorian's chest plate lightly. And because I am very curious to see what kind of machine an artificer like you would become. Behind him, Cassian slowly pulled up his crossbow. The forge thundered around them. "You speak of my brother like he was raw material," Dorian said. Azmakel's mechanical arm idly adjusted a tool along the work table, the spinning blade retracting with a soft metallic click. "Because he was." The answer came easily, casually, as if the statement required no cruelty at all. Dorian's hands tightened inside his gauntlets. "He was just a child. Innocent." Azmakel turned and leaned in. "Everything is innocent," the demon replied, "until it becomes something more useful." A faint smile crept into the voice behind the mask. "You should understand that better than most." The words landed like a blade. Dorian's breath left him slowly. Across the chamber, Cassian saw the shift immediately. He had seen that exact stillness in soldiers just before they broke. He murmured quietly toward the others, never taking his eyes off the demon. "Get ready." Juno adjusted her grip on her shield and hammer, muscles coiling beneath the leather straps. Jackson slipped one step closer to the cover of the vats, eyes flicking between Dorian and the towering demon. "Let me ask you something, little man," the demon said. His clawed hand reached out, lightly tapping the glowing lines of Dorian's gauntlet. "When I broke your brother's body..." That was as far as he got. Dorian moved. The punch came fast, driven by something far older than training. The armored gauntlet crashed into Azmakel's jaw with a ringing crack that echoed across the forge. For 1 second, the cavern seemed to hold its breath. Azmakel's head turned slightly with the force of the strike, and then it turned back, slowly. The demon looked down at Dorian with a kind of quiet curiosity. "That," Azmakel said softly, "was unwise." The clawed arm moved too swiftly for Dorian to dodge. The backhand caught him across the chestplate and lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing at all. Metal rang out against stone as Dorian's body slammed into a bank of iron crates nearly 20 feet away. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a sharp gasp as the crates collapsed beneath him. "Dorian!" Juno shouted, unable to control herself. The rest of the group was already moving. Siberic broke from cover in a low sprint, sword and shield flashing as he moved, while Dion thundered forward from the opposite side of the forge like a charging bull. Azmakel did not panic. He simply watched them. "Ah, there they are," the demon chuckled. The clawed hand lifted lazily. 2 corpses lay near the edge of the work table, discarded remains of earlier failures, limbs twisted and half-assembled. Azmakel's mechanical arm extended toward them, its fingers opening with a delicate mechanical hum. The bodies jerked. Bone cracked audibly as they twisted upright like puppets pulled by invisible strings. Green light flooded into their empty eyes. Siberic's blade struck the first corpse just as it lurched forward. The sword buried deep in its throat, but the creature barely noticed. Its arm swung wildly, forcing him to twist aside as the blow smashed into the iron railing behind him. "Fantastic," Jackson muttered from cover. "He's a puppet master as well." The second corpse launched itself at the charging barbarian. Dion met it head-on with a roar, driving his shoulder into the thing's chest and slamming it into the forge floor hard enough to crack stone. His fist followed a moment later, crushing the corpse's skull with a brutal downward strike. But the body kept moving. Mechanical joints locked and twisted as the creature's arm lashed upwards, catching Dion across the ribs and forcing him back a step. "Dion, kill Thing! Why Thing not dead?" Dion growled. Behind him, Azmakel watched the chaos unfold. The demon folded 2 of his arms behind his back, curious and observant, like a teacher studying a class of particularly interesting students. Dorian groaned as he pulled himself from the wreckage of the crates, armor dented, breath ragged. Azmakel turned his gaze toward him once again. "Maybe," the demon said pleasantly, "I can learn something from you all." Another arm extended. The spinning saw whirred to life. "But if we are exchanging techniques..." Azmakel's hand traced a slow arc through the air. The green vats pulsed. The animated corpse fighting Siberic suddenly shifted its stance, lowering its weight, angling its body. Cassian's eyes widened. "He's copying your style!" The corpse lunged forward with terrifying precision, mimicking Siberic's own footwork exactly as it drove him back toward the scaffolding. Across the forge floor, the one grappling with Dion changed tactics as well. It ducked low, pivoting exactly the way Dion had done moments earlier. Dion barely blocked the incoming strike. "Dion is fighting Dion!" Azmakel's voice carried across the forge. "Observation," the demon said calmly. "Imitation." Another corpse twitched on a nearby table, then another. "You mortals invent such fascinating methods of killing each other," Azmakel continued, almost conversational as the forge erupted into violence around him. It would be wasteful not to learn from them. Dorian pushed himself to his feet through the ringing in his skull, and he closed his eyes briefly. Then the runes across his armor ignited. Arcane light surged along the etched channels of the breastplate and down into the gauntlet. The mechanism along his forearm rotated with a humming click as plates shifted and locked into new positions. His armor awakened. Thin bands of energy spread outward from the core of the suit, rippling across the metal like a pulse moving through water. Dorian lifted his hand and words formed in his mind. The air around him bent. His physical form wavered, edges softening. His body seemed to exist in two places at once as arcane distortion folded light around him. Azmakel stared intently. The mask pulsed. Fascinating, the demon murmured. Dorian launched forward. He closed the distance quickly, boots skidding across the slick stone as his blurred form flickered toward the work table. The gauntlet flashed again, a surge of power building behind his strike. The blow landed. This time Dorian felt the impact travel into Azmakel's body. The demon shifted slightly under the force, the strike ringing against the reinforced metal beneath flesh. Azmakel looked down at him with specific curiosity, studying his armor once again. The demon's mechanical arm unfolded slowly, small lenses sliding open along the limb with quiet clicks. A thin green beam swept across Dorian's armor like a measuring instrument. The demon lifted one of his arms and flexed it once. A shimmer of energy flickered across the plates of metal embedded into his chest. The barrier appeared in an instant, a thin membrane of glowing force wrapping around his torso like a second skin. Dorian staggered back a step. Impossible. Azmakel rotated his shoulder experimentally. Yes, the demon said pleasantly. I believe I will like this upgrade. Behind them, the battle had spread across the forge floor. Leaf appeared from a shadow long enough to drive his dagger through the chest of an animated corpse facing him, twisting hard enough to crack the metal spine that had replaced the creature's vertebrae. The body collapsed with a wet, mechanical snap. Cassian fired 2 bolts from his crossbow in rapid succession that slowed the approach of a twisted creature headed right for him. Another began to rise from a nearby table. Dion roared as he tore the arm from the one he was fighting, green fluid spraying across the stone. The limb kept moving. Dion threw it aside in disgust and spit on the ground, wiping blood from his lip. More animating, Juno belted. Her shield crashed into another creature climbing from a vat, sending it tumbling back into the glowing liquid with a violent splash. The impact sent a wave of green fluid sloshing over the edge of the container. The liquid hissed where it struck the stone floor. Jackson darted between 2 iron pillars, blades flashing as he cut down a half-assembled construct before it could fully rise. He glanced toward the towering demon. Azmakel hadn't noticed another familiar face. Oh, come on, he muttered. He wiped green fluid from his sleeve, stepping forward with exaggerated irritation. You don't remember him, Jackson called toward the demon, pointing at Dorian. And you don't remember his brother. That makes sense. Azmakel did not respond. Jackson planted his hands on his hips. What about me? Surely you remember our deal, because if you don't, I'm pretty sure that lets me out of that contract. Legally speaking, of course. That got the demon's attention. He turned from Dorian briefly and stared at Jackson intently. Then, recognition flickered behind the mask. Ah, the demon's voice carried easily through the chaos. The debtor. Jackson blinked. That's it? Debtor? Azmakel shrugged slightly. I deal in souls. Yours was not particularly memorable. Jackson let out a sharp laugh. Not memorable? That is extremely offensive. I am quite famous, you know. Very important in certain circles. The demon examined him again, head tilting slightly as if reconsidering an unimportant detail. Indeed, Azmakel said calmly. And yet, here you are. The insult landed harder than any weapon. Sabaric nearly laughed despite himself as he parried another incoming strike. Jackson threw his hands up. Okay, you know what? I am officially tearing up that contract. I want my soul back. Azmakel turned back toward Dorian and blocked an incoming swing from his gauntlet. You mortals become terribly dramatic about transactions, he smiled. Leaf slashed through another construct while Dion hurled a broken section of scaffolding into a cluster of rising bodies. Juno slammed her shield into a vat control panel as she forced under the creature back. The impact shattered the mechanism. Steam exploded from the ruptured pipes. Green fluid surged violently inside the vat, sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Gabriel noticed it immediately. Be careful, but it was too late. Another vat nearby shuddered as one of Dion's thrown strikes dented the outer framework. The glowing liquid within surged upward, bubbling violently. Azmakel's head turned sharply toward the failing machinery. Chains rattled harder overhead. The scaffolding trembled. One of the vats cracked with a sharp metallic report. Green light spilled across the floor. The entire chamber began to feel unstable. Azmakel looked back at the party, and for the first time since the battle began, his voice held something sharper than curiosity. The green pulse behind the mask raged violently. "You're damaging my workshop," he rasped angrily. Gabriel had seen enough. The warlock had been waiting for the right moment from behind a large vat of liquid, and he stepped forward, raising his hand toward the demon. Azmakel looked over at him. The air tightened around Gabriel's palm and a burst of energy formed in his hand, swirling hotter and brighter until it burned white at the center. He unleashed his focus and a beam of energy raced across the forge like a newborn star, heat blasting outward as it hurled toward the towering demon. Azmakel did not move. One of his arms lifted lazily. The barrier he had copied from Dorian flared into existence again, shimmering across his torso. The beam struck the barrier, sending the force of energy ricocheting across the forge, splitting a giant pipe in half, spewing white steam into the air. For an instant the cavern filled with roaring white light. When the light had faded, Azmakel was still standing, unharmed. The barrier rippled once before settling back into place. The demon rotated his shoulder thoughtfully. Another impressive upgrade. One of his smaller arms extended toward Gabriel, its lenses sliding open again with quiet clicks. Green light scanning the lingering heat distortion in the air. Azmakel nodded slowly. Yes. The demon lifted his hand. The same sphere of energy appeared instantly above his palm. Gabriel's stomach dropped. No. Azmakel's voice carried calmly across the forge. You should be more careful what you demonstrate in front of envy incarnate. The beam shot forward, but not at Gabriel, at Leaf. He had been moving along the outer scaffolding, keeping low behind the broken machinery, dipping in and out of the fight, waiting for the moment when Azmakel's attention shifted just long enough for a clean strike. Now that moment had arrived, just not the way he had planned. Leaf, move! Cassian shouted. Leaf turned just in time to catch the brunt of the blast to the chest. He wasn't fast enough. The explosion hurled him across the iron walkway and into the stone wall with a sickening crack. His body collapsed to the floor, armor scorched, cloak smoldering faintly. He didn't move. Leaf! Jackson shouted. Azmakel watched the result with mild interest. The demon flexed his fingers experimentally. The heat ratio needs refinement. Cassian was already moving toward the fallen rogue when something else emerged from the smoke. One of the forge abominations stepped forward from the shadows near Gabriel. This one was larger than the others. Its body had been reinforced heavily with iron plating, its spine replaced with a thick mechanical column that glowed faintly green through the seams of its armor. But what caught Cassian's attention wasn't the body, it was the weapon. A massive blade hung from the creature's hand. The shape of it was unmistakable. Cassian froze. Gabriel, look out! Too late. The creature moved with sudden, terrifying speed. The blade swept forward in a brutal arc, its edge dripping with the same substance that Cassian had seen only hours earlier in the hands of the Justiciars. The same sword. Gabriel raised his arm instinctively, trying to turn the blow. The strike carved across his side. His cloak and skin split, and the force of the impact spun him halfway around before dropping him to his knees. Blood hit the stone floor in a dark splash. Gabriel gasped once, the sound thin and sharp as air fled his lungs. Cassian's heart lurched. Gabriel! He collapsed fully onto the forge floor, one hand pressed desperately against the wound as blood spread quickly between his fingers. Azmakel flexed his clawed fingers slowly. You see the difficulty, the demon said, voice carrying easily over the clamor of the forge. Every technique you show me becomes another tool. Cassian tightened his grip on his crossbow. Juno ran to Gabriel and dropped to one knee beside him just long enough to press her hand against the wound. Her magic flared faintly, green light spilling between her fingers. But even as the power tried to knit the torn flesh, she could feel how close he was to slipping away. She clenched her jaw. He's still breathing, she said quietly. Cassian nodded. Behind them, another abomination clawed its way up from the cracked rim of a vat. Azmakel watched them calmly. Now, the demon continued, shall we try something else? Something inside Cassian's mind clicked. That's it. We stop fighting like a unit, he rasped, gritting his teeth. The others glanced toward him. Siberic frowned. Explain. Cassian is right. He's learning our coordination, Dorian said quickly, eyes flicking toward Azmakel. Every time we move together or use a tactic, he sees the pattern. Another construct lunged toward Dion. Dion crushed its skull with a brutal downward swing and kicked the body aside. So we break the pattern, Juno said. Dorian nodded. No formations, no combos. Hit him from everywhere. Cassian gave a short, sharp grin. This might work. They moved, but not together. Cassian darted left, slipping between the metal pillars of the forge. Dion charged the opposite direction, smashing aside a pair of approaching constructs with reckless strength. Jackson vanished into the shadows near the vats, disappearing entirely. Juno stepped forward deliberately. Beside her, Saberic moved like a wall of iron. The two of them advanced toward Azmakel together. The demon's attention shifted immediately. New strategy? Azmakel murmured. Useless. Two warriors, straightforward, predictable. The clawed arm lifted, spinning blade whining softly as he stepped forward to meet them. Juno slammed her shield into the ground with a thunderous clang. Come on, then. Azmakel obliged. He advanced slowly at first, massive piston-driven legs grinding across the forge floor as sparks fell from the damaged machinery overhead. Saberic met him halfway. The warrior's blade struck hard against the barrier surrounding the demon's body, the impact ringing out like a hammer striking a bell. Azmakel barely moved. Juno followed immediately, her shield slamming against the demon's chest to drive him backward another step. The barrier flared. Azmakel's mechanical arms whirred, preparing to strike back, but Juno and Saberic didn't press the attack. They retreated. One step, then another, leading him. Azmakel followed without hesitation. Behind the demon, the scaffolding groaned louder now where the fight had damaged the delicate system of pulleys and gears that supported the upper platforms. Steam burst from fractured pipes overhead. Green fluid spilled slowly from the cracked vats nearby, pooling dangerously along the stone floor. Azmakel noticed none of it. His attention remained on the two warriors drawing him forward. Clever, the demon said, but insufficient. Saberic's blade struck again, sparks spraying across the barrier. Another step back. Juno raised her shield once more. Behind Azmakel, Dion climbed the damaged scaffolding like a living avalanche. The massive barbarian reached the tangled nest of gears and chains that controlled the overhead platforms and braced himself against the trembling iron frame. Cassian saw him. Now, he breathed. Dion didn't hesitate. He raised both arms and brought his weapon down onto the heart of the mechanism with a roar. The impact shattered the central gear. Iron teeth exploded outward in a shower of sparks. For half a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the entire system failed. The chains snapped tight, the scaffolding lurched violently. Azmakel's piston-driven legs lost purchase as the forge floor beneath him tilted suddenly with the shifting machinery. The demon staggered. Just once, but it was enough. The broken pulley system yanked upward violently as the counterweights collapsed. The sudden force launched Azmakel into the air. For the first time since the battle began, the demon looked surprised. His massive body spun helplessly upwards through the steam-filled air before crashing down hard against the edge of one of the damaged vats. The metal rim buckled under his weight. Azmakel plunged halfway into the molten contents. Not green fluid. This vat burned with something far hotter. Molten metal. The surface erupted around him as the demon struck it. A violent hiss tore through the forge as the superheated liquid splashed up around Azmakel's body. For the first time, the demon roared, not in anger, in pain. The molten metal clung to his mechanical limbs, heat warping the plates embedded in his flesh as the vat struggled to contain the violent impact. The forge trembled, steam blasting from ruptured pipes. The remaining vats sloshed dangerously along their frames. Cassian stared at the half-submerged demon, chest heaving. Half his body hung submerged in the vat of molten metal, the superheated liquid eating at the plates embedded in his flesh. The iron framework along his spine glowed a furious orange where the heat had begun to soften it. One of his mechanical arms clawed desperately at the rim of the vat, dragging against warped steel as he fought to pull himself free. The demon roared again, the sound deeper now, strained. Molten metal dripped from his limbs as he heaved upward, the surface of the vat boiling violently around him. Saberic approached, cautiously, blade still raised. Juno came beside him, shield lifted but ready. Dion climbed down from the ruined scaffolding behind him, breathing hard, smoke still curling from the shattered machinery above. Jackson emerged from the shadows near the vats, eyes fixed on the floundering demon. But Dorian reached Azmakel first. The artificer didn't hesitate. He strode directly to the edge of the vat and seized the demon by the tangled mess of black oil-soaked hair hanging from the back of his head. Azmakel snarled, one of his damaged arms swinging weakly toward him. Dorian ignored it. With a violent heave, he dragged the demon's upper body up and out of the molten vat. Metal shrieked as Azmakel's torso scraped across the rim. Liquid fire spilled down his side, dripping from the warped plates embedded in his chest. The mask of envy stared at him from inches away. Even now, even half melted and broken, the demon's voice carried its cold amusement. You believe. this changes anything, Azmakel rasped. Dorian's grip tightened. The demon's ruined body hung partially over the vat, molten metal dripping steadily from his limbs to splatter against the stone floor below. You're finished, Dorian said quietly. Azmakel laughed. The sound was ugly now, broken by the damage to his chest. You think killing me matters? The demon's head tilted slightly in Dorian's grip. My work will continue. He gestured weakly toward the cavern around them. Xavier will rise whether you stand in the way or not. Dorian leaned closer. The light from the molten vat flickered across his armor, reflecting the hard lines of his face. We don't need you, he said. Azmakel turned slightly, as if though studying him again. Don't you? What about your brother? Azmakel's cracked lips curled into something that might have been a smile. You came here hoping I would give him back. Dorian's eyes burned. You mistake me. The demon's laugh came weak but confident. Artificers are all the same. We believe if you understand a machine well enough, we can rebuild anything. Dorian shook his head slowly. That's right, but I don't need you to restore my brother's soul. He leaned down until the mask of envy was inches from his face. I came here to make sure you never get to see your lord return. The demon's eyes burned furiously. Azmakel's mechanical arm twitched weakly. You are insignificant in the scope of Xavier's reign. Dorian's expression didn't change. Maybe, but unfortunately, you won't be here to see it. He released his grip on the matted mess of hair, and Azmakel's ruined body collapsed against the stone floor beside the vat, molten metal dripping from his limbs as he tried to crawl forward. Dorian turned away from him. He looked at Zabaric and gave a single nod. The warrior stepped forward without a word. Azmakel tried to rise. Go to hell, demon, he whispered. The great sword came down in a clean, brutal arc. The blade struck the demon's neck with a heavy crack of steel and bone, and the head separated. Azmakel's body collapsed fully onto the forge floor. The severed head lay where it had fallen. Then something shifted. The mask of envy tore itself free from the ruined flesh of the demon's face with a sharp metallic snap. The mask dropped to the stone floor beside the corpse with a clang. The sound echoed through the cavern like a struck bell. The green glow faded from Azmakel's lifeless body, and for the first time since they had entered the forge, the demon artificer lay completely still. The silence came slowly. Not all at once. At first, the forge still groaned and hissed around them, wounded machinery venting steam through the broken pipes, molten metal slopping restlessly inside the damaged vat where Azmakel had fallen. But the movement was gone. The creatures. All across the cavern floor, the twisted bodies that had once labored through the forge now lay scattered and motionless. One had collapsed halfway across a scaffold ladder. Another hung slack from the control levers that had been turning moments earlier. The one Dion had thrown into the vat had drifted sideways against the metal rim, its green-lit veins now dark and dead. They stopped, Cassian said quietly. Juno looked up from where she knelt beside Gabriel. He lay pale against the stone, breath shallow, one hand weakly gripping her sleeve as she worked. The wound across his side had slowed its bleeding under her magic, but the cloth of his robes were already soaked through. Juno's eyes moved across the cavern. Every construct, every machine-born abomination, still. Dion followed her gaze, chest heaving as the fight finally drained out of him. Dion was worried. Weird feeling for Dion. Dorian stood near the vat where Azmakel had died. The demon's body lay crumpled nearby, warped metal plates still glowing faintly from the heat that had begun to melt them. He studied the dead forge workers scattered around the chamber. A hive mind, he said quietly. Cassian nodded once. He was controlling them. Jackson kicked one of the fallen constructs lightly with his boot. It didn't react. Well, he muttered, that's convenient for us. We would have been here a while. The moment of relief didn't last long. Juno's hand paused where it pressed against Gabriel's side. Her expression tightened. Cassian saw it immediately. What is it? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pushed the torn fabric aside carefully and leaned closer to the wound. The slash was deep, carved across Gabriel's ribs by the enormous Justiciar blade. But that wasn't what made her freeze. Thin, black veins crept outward from the cut. They spread slowly beneath the skin, spidering away from the injury like ink bleeding through paper. Cassian's stomach sank. No. Juno pulled her hand back slightly. The blade, Cassian said, voice faint but steady. The same one that struck Vera. Juno cursed under her breath. The Wither. Cassian gave the smallest nod. Yes. Juno swallowed hard, forcing her hands steady again as she resumed working the healing magic around the wound. I can stabilize it, she said. Slow it down. Across the chamber, Dion had sifted through the damaged scaffolding to reach Leaf. The rogue stirred weakly as Dion lifted him, the smell of burned leather and singed cloth still clinging to him. You're heavy for a small guy, Dion smiled. Leaf's eyes cracked open just enough to glare at him. I've been told worse. Dion carried him down to the forge floor where Juno glanced up from Gabriel. He'll recover, she said after a quick look. Bad concussion, but he'll live. For a few minutes the cavern held nothing but the quiet sounds of survival. Bandages tightening, armor being shifted, the distant hiss of molten metal settling in the damaged vats. Then Jackson spoke. So, what now? Cassian looked around the cavern. The forge stretched outward in every direction, a maze of scaffolding, tables, vats, and machinery. Now, we find out what he was building. They began searching. Sabaric forced open one of the iron crates stacked near the forge altar. The lid splintered under the strike of his sword, revealing rows of freshly forged blades packed in oilcloth. Cassian stepped beside him and picked one up. His jaw tightened again. Well, he said grimly, that answers one question. Sabaric took one look. Those look familiar. Cassian turned the sword slightly in the green forge light. The cruel crossguard, the thick spine of the blade, the subtle channel carved along its center. Justiciar steel. Dozens of them filled the crates. Another crate held more. Dorian had moved to the massive drafting table near the center of the forge. Papers covered its surface, schematics drawn in precise mechanical detail, margins crowded with infernal runes and chemical formulas written in Asmakel's jagged hand. He turned one of the pages slowly, his brow furrowed. Cassian, look at this. Cassian joined him. The drawing showed a towering structure of iron frames and ritual channels surrounding a central pyre. Not a weapon, a machine. Dorian read the title etched across the top. The Soul Forge. Jackson leaned closer, peering over Dorian's shoulder. That sounds like pertinent information. Dorian traced one of the diagrams with a finger. This isn't a forge for metal. He pointed to the ritual sigils surrounding the structure. It's a ritual engine. Cassian's gaze moved to another page beside it. This one showed the cross-section of a Justiciar blade. Thin channels ran through the steel, connecting the weapon to a reservoir hidden inside the hilt. Chemical compounds were listed beside the diagram, unknown fluids and strange reagents, and a single note scrawled along the edge of the page. Accelerates corruption. Juno looked up from Gabriel. Let me guess. Cassian didn't take his eyes off the page. The Wither. Gabriel gave a tired nod from the floor. The church knows exactly what it's doing. Silence fell over the table. Jackson rubbed the back of his neck. So the demon was building weapons for the church, who is actively spreading the Wither? He gestured toward the towering schematic of the Soul Forge. And that same demon is also building some nightmare ritual for Xavier's resurrection? Dorian nodded slowly. Yes. Cassian looked back across the cavern at Asmakel's ruined body. All under Adrian's city. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Dorian noticed something on the floor near the vat. The Mask of Envy. It still lay where it had fallen when Sabaric severed the demon's head. The artifact looked strangely small now. Just a piece of metal. Dorian stepped toward it. Cassian frowned. Careful. Dorian crouched slowly and picked it up. The mask felt cold in his hands. He turned it slightly, studying the etched lines across its surface. It seemed so simple, so harmless. Then the metal warmed. Dorian's breath caught. Green light flickered once across the mask, and from across the forge, Cassian watched as Dorian's eyes flashed the same eerie shade of green.